Hello, this is Cryptic Coyote, and I'm going to start off with a personal story, but also this is my first video. So with that, I will begin. I'd like to begin with the fact that I've been somewhat evaluated medically, and it was confirmed that I have an unspecified psychosis diagnosis. So this isn't really supernatural. However, this had to be one of my scariest experiences relating to my diagnosis, and I'll lead up to it. I'll start with where I suspect this all began. Just to give a good idea, most of this takes place where I work, but also at home sometimes. The place I work is an older factory. I will give a little background information here before I actually start my story. I'm a 21-year-old female, though transgender, female to male, and hoping to transition someday. I live with my mom and sister in Kentucky. My sister is older than I by 2 years, and we all work in the same factory. During this story, I was on first and third shift, though the scariest bits would be during third shift. I've never heard of my coworkers having as much difficulty as I did, even on this shift. Despite them saying there's some possibility of this place being haunted, however, hear me out. I wasn't really this open to the possibility of supernatural things before this all went to hell. So without further ado, let's start right off to where I assume it all began. Sometime mid last year, about early September, I'd been severely stressed, developed some major anxiety and depression issues. It'd get so bad, I'd have bad stomach pains. That's something I had for quite some time thereafter. And it also fueled my imagination. Supposedly my imagination for the worse. I didn't pay any mind to how this all started at first. It was with the vague, still shadow people in my periphery. They would immediately disappear if I so much turned a little to see them. The other thing, I'd hear my name shouted, but only for a second. I asked my coworkers or anyone else I knew if there had been a shout. They'd say they hadn't spoke. I brushed this all off as my stress messing with my imagination. I should have paid better attention at this point though. The thing is, it did die down for a few months. I ignored any sort of visual or auditory mishaps occurring, as they were lacking at this time. This was until the coming year, right around mid-January. This is where it really began. And I apologize if I'm leaving out major details. I was so stuck in my internal world during and made it hard for me to really pay attention to a lot of details. Anyways, so come January, my anxiety was out of the roof. I'd have some panic attacks at small things, was easier to startle. One other detail I'd like to mention, as it'll come into play later on, is I often felt I'd detached from my body, in the sense I don't feel like I belong in my own body. This detail alone was enough to throw off sense of time and even made me easy to scare. I was already distressed enough by this. However, to add salt to the wounds, I began to mishear things quite often, way more than I was used to. I saw more things that were abnormal, such as things moving, but when I took a second look, it was absolutely still. That's when the shadows began to appear by that time, slowly appearing more often as the symptoms worsened. It went from things simply moving, even though they hadn't, to shadowy figures following me around. The shadows set me on edge, in fear they were watching and judging me with each day they appeared. It wasn't long before I heard distant screaming every so often, incoherent whispering as well. These were quite upsetting and malicious. I do recall one other thing that scared me along with all of this. The internal voices. One was coined as Elliot. He was the worst entity I have ever heard inside of my own head. He would antagonize me. He told me so many times to do things I feared being controlled to do. And he was such a bully that he nearly sent me over the edge just hearing him. He'd say horrible things, and I'll recall a couple or so quotes he actually told me. I'll also mention his voice. It was so slick. If a snake could talk, I'm sure he'd be like that. Hey, you should cut yourself open and see if anything is real. Hurt yourself already. Do it already. You got to hurt your coworker over there. He's done bad things. He deserves it. Of course, I never followed through with his commands, though he'd irk my anxiety up to such a level. I would actually have to anchor myself to my own bed with my hands. His words pierced my skull like a knife, each word mocking me. I did get to the degree I actually did try to hurt myself with my own nails, just shut him up. He never shut up. He was just so mocking and sinister. With that torment on its own, I was already distraught and overwhelmed. External stimuli was almost too obnoxious for me to handle. Internal stimuli was becoming just as overstimulating. As this dragged on eventually, and this made me start feeling dissociated or detached from my own body, to the point that I began feeling the floor fall out beneath me. I had to say that was very unpleasant. It still actually happens. So to the scariest moment I believe that's happened out of this, after all of this, it became so much that one day on break at work, I was minding my own business, being relaxed in the chair in this small break room. I wish I could give a good estimate on how big the room is. I'd say like a bathroom size type of room, and there's these two doors on opposite sides of the room itself. The chairs and side table are sitting near the corner facing away from the door, and this is on the right side. It leads back to my work department. I'm sitting in one of the chairs, laying myself so I was facing that exact door I mentioned a moment ago, and just out of my periphery, nearly in my direct vision, I see a shadowy head peeking out through the window. As a moment of doubt that maybe I just misinterpreted something I saw, I gave it a second glance. This thing left right away. So taking another look, I swear I never felt so afraid. My heart stopping for a second as it punched me right in the gut. I was being watched. The frightening experience was settling in. I started to break down crying and immediately called my sister. Out of everything I experienced during this whole distressful time, that had to be the worst thing that actually broke me out of my emotional comfort zone. After that occurred, things spiraled downhill almost rapidly, becoming delusional with the preoccupation that some demon was taking over my brain and actions. I felt as though I had began losing control of everything, my body mostly, afraid especially of hurting myself or others. As fearful as I was for what might happen, afraid of becoming so ill I'd depart completely from reality, I got myself into a hospital and got treatment right away. I've gotten help for all my symptoms and experiences. I've left out some experiences that I felt weren't as important to add to this story. I've been put on medication that's controlling this condition much better. I will say, I hope everyone who reads this will understand that psychosis isn't just someone acting like those depicted killers in media that they say is psychotic. It's absolutely terrifying, and I never wish this upon anyone, not even my enemies.